Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Without further ado, returning to The Picture of Dorian Gray as read by Lord Naren White. Delicate lace ruffles fell over the lean yellow hands that were so overladen with rings. He had been a macaroni of the 18th century, and the friend, in his youth, of Lord Ferrars. What of the second Lord Sherard, the companion of the Prince Regent in his wildest days, and one of the witnesses at the secret marriage with Miss Fitzherbert? How proud and handsome he was, with his chestnut curls and insolent pose! What passions had he bequeathed! The world had looked upon him as infamous. He had led the orgies at Carlton House. The star of the Garter glittered upon his breast. Beside him hung the portrait of his wife, a pallid, thin-lipped woman in black. Her blood also stirred within him. How curious it all seemed! Yet one had ancestors in literature, as well as in one's own race, nearer perhaps in type and temperament, many of them, and certainly with an influence of which one was more absolutely conscious. There were times when it seemed to Dorian Gray that the whole of history was merely the record of his own life, not as he had lived it in act and circumstance, but as his imagination had created it for him, as it had been in his brain and in his passions. He felt that he had known them all, those strange, terrible figures that had passed across the stage of the world, and made sin so marvelous and evil so full of wonder. It seemed to him that in some mysterious way their lives had been his own. The hero of the dangerous novel that had so influenced his life, he had himself had this curious fancy. In a chapter of the book, he tells how, crowned with laurel, lest lightning might strike him, he had sat, as Tiberius, in a garden at Capri, reading the shameful books of Elephantis, while dwarfs and peacocks strutted round him, and the flute-player mocked the swinger of the censer, and, as Caligula, had caroused with the green-shirted jockeys in their stables, and supped in an ivory manger with the jewel-frontleted horse, and as Domitian had wandered through a corridor lined with marble mirrors, looking round with haggard eyes for the reflection of the dagger that was to end his days, and sick with that ennui, that te deum vitae, that comes on those to whom life denies nothing, and had peered through a clear emerald at the red shambles of the circus, and then, in a litter of pearl and purple drawn by silver-shod mules, been carried through the street of pomegranates to a house of gold, and heard men cry on Nero Caesar as he passed by, and as Elagabalus had his face painted with colors, and plied the distaff among the women, and brought the moon from Carthage, and given her in mystic marriage to the sun. Over and over Dorian used to read this fantastic chapter, and the chapter immediately following, in which the hero describes the curious tapestries that he had woven for him from Gustave Moreau's designs, and on which were pictured the awful and beautiful forms of those whom vice and blood and weariness had made monstrous or mad. Filippo, Duke of Milan, who slew his wife and painted her lips with a scarlet poison. Pietro Barbi, the Venetian known as Paul II, who sought in his vanity to assume the title of Formosus, and whose tiara, valued at 200,000 florins, was bought at the price of a terrible sin. Gian Maria Visconti, who used hounds to chase living men, and whose murdered body was covered with roses by a harlot who had loved him. The Borgia on his white horse, with fratricide riding beside him, and his mantle stained with the blood of Perota. Pietro Riario, the young cardinal archbishop of Florence, child and minion of Sixtus IV, whose beauty was equalled only by his debauchery, who received Leonora of Aragon in a pavilion of white and crimson silk, filled with nymphs and centaurs, and gilded a boy, that he might serve her at the feast of Ganymede or Hylas. Ezelin, whose melancholy could be cured only by the spectacle of death, and who had a passion for red blood, as other men have for red wine, the son for the fiend, as was reported, and one who had cheated his father at dice when gambling with him for his own soul. Giambattista Cibo, who in mockery took the name of innocent, and into whose torpid veins the blood of 3 lads was infused by a Jewish doctor, Sigismondo Malatesta, the lover of Isota, and the lord of Rimini, whose effigy was burned at Rome, as the enemy of God and man, who strangled Polissena with a napkin, and gave poison to Ginevere d'Este in a cup of emerald, and in honor of a shameful passion built a pagan church for Christian worship. Charles VI, who had so wildly adored his brother's wife that a leper had warned him of the insanity that was coming on him, and who could only be soothed by Saracen cards painted with the images of love and death and madness, and in his trimmed jerkin and jeweled cap and acanthus-like curls. Griffonetto Baglioni, who slew Astore with his bride and Seminetto with his page, and whose comeliness was such that, as he lay dying in the yellow piazza of Perugia, those who had hated him could not choose but weep, and Atalanta, who had cursed him, blessed him. There was a horrible fascination in them all. He saw them at night, and they troubled his imagination in the day. The Renaissance knew of strange manners of poisoning by a helmet and a lighted torch, by an embroidered glove and a jeweled fan, by a gilded pomander and by an amber chain. Dorian Gray had been poisoned by a book. There were moments when he looked on evil, simply as a mode through which he could realize his conception of the beautiful. Chapter 10. It was on the 7th of November, the eve of his own 32nd birthday, as he often remembered afterwards. He was walking home about 11 o'clock from Lord Henry's, where he had been dining, and was wrapped in heavy furs, as the night was cold and foggy. At the corner of Grosvenor Square and South Audley Street, a man passed him in the mist, walking very fast, and with the collar of his grey ulster turned up. He had a bag in his hand. He recognized him. It was Basil Hallward. A strange sense of fear, for which he could not account, came over him. He made no sign of recognition and went on slowly in the direction of his own house. But Hallward had seen him. Dorian heard him first stopping, and then hurrying after him. In a few moments his hand was on his arm. "Dorian! What an extraordinary piece of luck. I have been waiting for you ever since 9 o'clock in your library. Finally, I took pity on your tired servant and told him to go to bed as he let me out. I'm off to Paris by the midnight train, and I wanted to particularly see you before I left. I thought it was you, rather your fur coat, as you passed me, but I wasn't quite sure. Didn't you recognize me? In this fog, my dear Basil! Why, I can't even recognize Grosvenor Square. I believe my house is somewhere about here, but I don't feel at all certain about it. I am certain you are going away, as I have not seen you for ages. But I suppose you will be back soon. No, I am going to be out of England for 6 months. I intend to take a studio in Paris and shut myself up till I have finished a great picture I have in my head. However, it wasn't about myself I wanted to talk. Here we are at your door. Let me come in for a moment. I have something to say to you." "I shall be charmed, but won't you miss your train?" said Dorian Gray, languidly, as he passed up the steps and opened the door with his latch key. The lamplight struggled out through the fog, and Hallward looked at his watch. "I have heaps of time," he answered. "The train doesn't go till 12:15, and it is only just 11. In fact, I was on my way to the club to look for you when I met you. You see, I shan't have any delay about luggage, as I have sent on my heavy things. All I have with me is in this bag, and I can easily get to Victoria in 20 minutes. Dorian looked at him and smiled. What a way for a fashionable painter to travel! A Gladstone bag and an ulster. Come in, or the fog will get into the house. And mind you, don't talk about anything serious. Nothing is serious nowadays. At least, nothing should be. Hallward shook his head as he entered, and followed Dorian into the library. There was a bright wood fire blazing in the large open hearth. The lamps were lit, and an open Dutch silver spirit case stood, with some siphons of soda water and large cut glass tumblers on a little table. You see, your servant made me quite at home, Dorian. He gave me everything I wanted, including your best cigarettes. He is a most hospitable creature. I like him much better than the Frenchman you used to have. What has become of the Frenchman, by the by? Dorian shrugged his shoulders. I believe he married Lady Ashton's maid and has established her in Paris as an English dressmaker. Anglomanie is very fashionable over there now, I hear. It seems silly of the French, doesn't it? But do you know, he was not at all a bad servant. I never liked him, but I had nothing to complain about. One often imagines things that are quite absurd. He was really devoted to me, and seemed quite sorry when he went away. Have another brandy and soda. Would you like hock and seltzer? I always take hock and seltzer myself. There's sure to be some in the next room. Thanks, I won't have anything more, said Hallward, taking his cap and coat off, and throwing them on the bag that he had placed in the corner. And now, my dear fellow, I want to speak to you more seriously. Don't frown like that. You make it so much more difficult for me. What is this all about? Cried Dorian, in his petulant way, flinging himself down on the sofa. I hope it is not about myself. I am tired of myself tonight. I should like to be somebody else. It is about yourself, answered Hallward, in his grave, deep voice. And I must say to you, I shall only keep you half an hour. Dorian sighed, and lit a cigarette. Half an hour, he murmured. It is not so much to ask of you, Dorian, and it is entirely for your own sake that I am speaking. I think it is right that you should know that the most dreadful things are being said about you in London, things that I could hardly repeat to you. I don't wish to know anything about them. I love the scandals about other people, but scandals about myself don't interest me. They have got not the charm of novelty. They must interest you. Dorian, every gentleman is interested in his good name. You don't want people to talk of you as something vile and degraded. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.